Still smoking from a Russian artillery barrage, this is what's left of the city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine.
Each city is important, each town is important for Ukraine, but this is not something which will substantially influence on their chances to win this war.
8 лютого, місто Бахмут, місто горить, ворог давить.
Street-to-street fighting has been going on for weeks.
We are
dealing with the situation on each of the front lines in detail. The most difficult, as before, is Bakhmut. About 800 enemies were killed in this direction alone.
So much talk about a big Russian offensive, but it really hasn't materialized in the traditional sense as a big offensive. What it looks like is more of just an increase in the number of poorly trained, poorly led, and poorly equipped conscripts, feeding them into the same meat grinder, frankly, without much real movement.
It's not just soldiers. Russian tanks and armoured personnel carriers are also being expended at a high rate. Frontline fighting has been brutal and relentless, evoking tactics from more than a century ago.
We've all seen pictures of Ukrainian soldiers in these trench lines. I mean, it does look exactly like the First World War, only you've got drones are involved now. The artillery is more lethal. The other weapons are more lethal.
Ukrainian soldiers call this their zero line. They share their combat experiences online, not only to win hearts and minds, but also to get donations of equipment or supplies.
It's quite open because we are in digital era. It gives the possibility of this personal touch, and I think that this is why so many people, usual citizens of other countries, are supporting us.
Ukrainian soldiers are well drilled in putting grenades on drones to clear Russian defences. Russia has tried similar tactics.
This has become normal, this sort of tactical use of basically an expendable quadcopter that could deliver a strike that kills or wounds 3, 4, 5 enemy soldiers down in a bunker. And of course that has a psychological effect too, particularly during wintertime when there is no foliage and soldiers realize that they are totally exposed. They have to assume that they're exposed all the time.
The psychological toll of knowing that the Russian drones were always there, the understanding that they're just a few hundred meters away from you, wanting to kill you. I mean, ultimately, their job is to try to kill us, while our job is trying to liberate this country.
Sarah Ashton Cirillo was an American journalist who last October signed up to serve as a combat medic in Ukraine's army, fighting until recently in the frontline trenches.
We successfully repelled them throughout the month of February. And in my second to last day in the trenches, as you can see, I have a bandage here and a wound here. I was hit by artillery shrapnel.
She was filming just before she was hit.
When the hit happened, I was concussed, or at least shaken up for a few seconds. And I didn't realize I was the one that was hit. So when the shell landed, it stunned me. And my ears were ringing and I was wondering what had happened. I saw blood coming down and I looked around to see whose blood it was. And then I realized it was my blood. And this is a small price for liberation and for freedom. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
She and her comrades are now facing spring rains and lots of mud.
It's going to be slop. The spring and the mud and the muck is something that we're not afraid of, and we will manage to use to our advantage.
What Ukraine can't control is whether China decides to supply Russia with much-needed ammunition.
they have lack of supplies, and I think that this is one of the issues which they try to push hard with China, for example, to get some assistance from them in supplies, because they cannot produce so much they need.
China obviously wants to see us fail, but I don't think that they are really willing to get fully stuck in, because they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily have the strongest hand. I think they are trying to find a way to stay below the threshold of U.S. sanctions, but for sure they're watching to see, do we have the will to see this through.
Europe and the West have promised more ammunition and armour, which is slowly arriving in time for an expected spring counter-offensive.
Now we have trust in the strategy that we can win, but I think that somewhere I feel that Europeans are a little bit relaxed. They feel that we're keeping the line, that we're fighting, and they think that they have time. Obviously we have time, but Ukraine is paying too high a price for each day of this war, and for us time is not limitless.